is Sophia Voychehovski. I will tell you a little bit more about myself in a second. But just a quick poll. I kind of want to hear about you guys quickly. How many of you are programming in an object-oriented language? Everybody? Okay, cool. So a lot of this content is mostly, I have given this talk 6-7 times, always to a audience of user experience designers. Actually, the last time I gave this talk was to a little bit of a different audience. I did the workshop version of the talk, and that was actually to a group of librarians. So that was fun. It was a whole conference just for librarians that are doing user experience design, which actually, if you think about it, makes a lot of sense, because what is being a librarian is organizing information, right, and helping people access information. So that was the first time I kind of gave this talk to a different audience. I've never given this talk to a room full of developers and programmers. So I'm going to make this a little bit more conversational. I'm going to be asking you guys questions because I'm very curious to hear some of your thoughts on some of the things that I've been going around the country talking about, and sort of stealing some of your terminology, and maybe even bastardizing some of your terminology. So feel free to tell me when I'm doing that. So is anybody here, so it looks like most everybody is programming in an object-oriented language of some sort. Is anybody here, you're going to show your age, has anybody here, did anybody do the transition from a procedural language into an object-oriented language? Okay, what did you start off with?
COBOL.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, well, in my first programming course, I had Fortran, assembly language, and at the same time, structured language.
Right. And was it tough to transition into an object-oriented language?
It was really, that was when I was in college, and it was a great way, because at that time there was, structured programming was kind of a new thing. So we were taught algorithms with a structured language, but at the same time we had these go-to languages, and our mind was set through structured language. That was, the old battle, the evil of go-to and that kind of thing.
So from what I've read and from some of the conversations that I've had, it is kind of, you have to sort of change your thinking going from a procedural language to an object-oriented language. It's a different methodology. It really is a different thought process. And a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about here is I'm trying to get user experience designers. We're literally about 20, 25 years, 15 years behind the curve. We're still thinking procedurally. We're not thinking about our objects. So a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today actually might seem like a no-brainer to you. It might be kind of might be using a little bit of different terminology because I'm coming from a user experience design perspective, but it should sound actually pretty familiar. The funny thing is, maybe the scary thing for those of you that are working with user experience designers, is when I give this talk and I give this workshop to user experience designers, it blows their mind. It's like a totally new world for them. And everybody says, it kind of makes sense, but this is not the way that I have been thinking about things. So that's a little bit scary. And kind of my mission here is to sort of get some of the thinking that you guys are doing every day. And when you're doing your object modeling and your object design and creating a UML do y'all create UML diagrams? Is that a thing? No, not cool anymore? Okay. All right. I'm trying to learn UML. So to kind of set it up, let me give you a little bit of my history and who I am. My name's Sophia Voychehovski. It's a long Polish last name. At Sophia VUX is my Twitter, so I sometimes tweet about stuff and cats and things. My email address, feel free to reach out to me if you want to continue the conversation about this stuff and give me your thoughts. And a little bit just of my background. So currently, I have my own practice, a user experience design practice. I consult mainly to startups in the Atlanta area. So tech startups doing really cool stuff that I can get really excited about. But I spent a lot of time in the corporate world at large agencies. So I've done government projects and I've done insurance companies and banks and all that fun stuff. So I've definitely lived in that world. But I started my own practice to specifically be able to pick my own clients and pick the really fun projects. So I started, I'm going to trip over this. Okay, you can laugh at me when I do trip over this thing. I'm going to try not to. But so my big claim to fame and what got me behind the podium was actually some work that I did. The only place I was ever internal, the only place that I wasn't on the consulting circuit was CNN. And while I was at CNN, we were working on this big redesign project that actually just launched a year and a half after I left. Kyle and I actually worked together at CNN. But there was a little hiccup in the middle of this redesign project that I actually got hired to work on. That hiccup was the 2012 presidential elections. Whoa, they just kind of came out of nowhere and bit us in the ass. You'd think we would have seen that coming. So about July, I got pulled on to do the UX for the CNN election, or it was not just specifically the CNN results. And why this was such a big deal is because we were doing this new thing called responsive design. What? This is 2012. So I actually hadn't even heard of this in 2012. The editorial staff and the business folks at the company, they definitely had no idea what responsive design was. I think, Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong, most of the developers and the dev team, it was a new thing for them as well. It was kind of, all right, we hadn't, and especially at that scale. We had been like reading about it and kind of like it was on the radar. So we decided to do this big experiment for something where a deadline that wasn't going to move, like we were going to launch on November 6th. That was going to happen. And also something that was incredibly high profile. So CNN makes like all their money on election night. So we really couldn't screw it up. So it was very high stakes and kind of high risk because we were all doing something completely new. And we managed to pull it off. And we pulled it off kind of by the skin of our teeth. It was tough. There was lots of weekends worked. But we pulled it off, and we had really good uptime. And of course, on election night, I have like 12 browser tabs open and I'm looking at all the competition, and we really did kill it. So we did really well. But afterward, of course, you have to do a postmortem and kind of think through like, what could have we done better? So maybe how could we succeeded, but we kind of spilled a lot of blood and sweat and tears in the process of our success. So I kind of thought through what were the things that I would do differently and what were the things that we did right. And I would say the bottom four things are the things that we did wrong, and the top thing is the thing that we did right. And the top thing is the thing that I think was one of our saving graces. So this is basically what this talk has turned into, is a focus on this modular design, or what has been kind of evolved to be called what I'm calling object-oriented UX. But you could call it modular design or content. Some people are calling it content modeling. So just a quick overview. This is what I talked about at UX Week in 2013. These were like the outline of the talk. And it's called the Simplicity Imperative. You can get it on Vimeo and YouTube. So basically, the kind of the 3-minute spiel, the modular design piece, and this is what we're going to focus on, so I'm going to skip over that. These are things that I think that we could have done better on. And I could probably do a talk on each one of these, but to overview it quickly, simplifying your team. So this is one thing that I don't think we did right. We had a very large team, and one thing that we didn't do is we didn't get in the same room together. So until like the last 2 weeks, then we got in the same room together. So we had design on one side, and we were lucky enough to be in the same building, but we had design over here and we had development over here, and it was about a 5-minute walk. So sure, we could IM each other, and we did, but we should have been elbow to elbow, arm's length, moving forward together. So simplifying your team, having a smaller team that is working more collaboratively. So collaboration up, usually moving parts or people down. Prioritizing prioritization, so mobile first, or even like thinking mobile only for a while. Iterating on fidelity, not on functionality. So quick anecdote for this piece. So when I got brought on to the election results, the project manager told me, and my boss told me, okay, so sprint 1 is starting in 4 days. So I had about 4 days lead time to build out some wireframes for this. And he said, you know what, don't worry about it though, because sprint 1, we're just doing the state template. So state like California or Nevada or Georgia. We're just doing the template for state. So we only need 1 wireframe on Monday. And then, they'll be doing that 1 wireframe for the next 2 weeks. And then after that, then you can catch up with everything else. And instinctually, something about this seemed wrong. So what this sounded like to me is design the 1 cog in the machine, but don't worry about the whole machine. We'll worry about the whole machine later. Or we're going to worry about this 1 cog at a time. And that didn't quite seem right. So I, basically pulled a couple all-nighters and stayed up all weekend and quickly kind of reverse engineered the 2008 version, which had about 17 templates, like 9 or 10 different types of modules, and reduced it down to 4 templates and 4 modules. And there was a ton of complexity in each of those, but at least we could kind of get the entire system in our periphery. So having that reduced modular system where we had those 4 templates, 4 modules, that's it, really helped us kind of contain the complexity a little bit. And so this is what I've sort of latched onto, is that modular design piece. Oh yeah, and then make time for simple. So we're having a little bit more than four days before. So object-oriented programming, just in case you're not aware. So this is how our friends at Google define it. Object-oriented programming is a programming language model organized around objects rather than actions and data rather than logic. So I could basically scratch out programming and put design, and basically what I'm saying is the same thing. And the revolution here is most of what user experience traditionally what we do is we organize ourselves around actions, not around the objects. So this is my kind of crappy definition, needs work. So object-oriented UX, the practice of identifying and designing the objects needed to carry out the goals of a digital system. A couple little extra things popped in there. And mapping how these objects interlock to create an elegant and efficient modular system. Oh, and it's not only the practice, but the focus, kind of like doing this part first, doing this before a lot of the other stuff that we do, not as an afterthought. And the objects, talking about real-world objects. So in object-oriented programming, you definitely need to think about the real-world objects, but some of the other objects that you end up creating are not necessarily real-world objects. They're things that are the interface objects. And this is really a focus on those real-world or business objects. So people, campaigns, events, articles, etc. So quick game. And we're playing this game not because object-oriented UX really has anything to do with responsive design. The reason being that all this thinking was forged in the crucible of responsive design. And responsive design basically forcing us to think in this way. So I'm going to switch over here real quick, and we're going to, hang on, let me drag it over. Da-da-da. Oh, other way. There we go. Oh, it's so pretty. Okay. That's expanded, right? Okay. All right, so we're going to look at an e-commerce example first and try to figure out which one is the responsive one. And we're not going to do the party trick where we resize the browser, okay? We're going to see if we can tell without doing that. So we have lightingdirect.com and we have skinnyties.com. Which one do we think is responsive? Okay. All right, now let's do who all here's from Atlanta? Oh, cool, that's the locals. I'm from Atlanta too. All right, so we have our good friends at Creative Loafing. Okay. Wonderful publication. And then we have Atlanta Magazine. Which one do you think is responsive? Creative Loafing? Yeah? What do y'all think? Magazine. This could definitely be responsive. This would be really, really hard to code to multiple breakpoints, right? With each one of those little pieces, you'd have to kind of figure out how they would react. All right, and one more. London Tube. Oh. We won't click into anything. London Tube. All right, and our good friends at Marta. No, not this. Probably Marta. Yeah, they're really they get with the program, don't they? So this was pretty easy, right? We kind of knew. We didn't have to do the party trick, and there are some telltale signs, like this one kind of has more white space on either side. But I've done this before where I kind of zoom it in too, so you can't see the white space if everybody still gets the answer right. So how could you tell? How did you know which one was responsive? More blocks? What would you say? On the sides. So even without that padding on the sides, do you think you still would have been able to tell? They look more modern. They look like they've probably been updated more recently. But what does it mean to look more modern?
Well, you can't, in the non-responsive, you can't imagine narrow them down like half the size of the page. You can't imagine where the pieces would.
Right. And why is it so hard to imagine where all the pieces would go on a site like this? There's just a lot of them, right? There's a lot more pieces. The responsive sites are a lot simpler. You can kind of see those blocks. You can almost see the grid, right? Which sites look easier to use? What do you think? Would you rather be navigating to find where you're going to go here or here? Depends. I think that these responsive sites look like they're a lot easier to use. So these are simple not because they're dumb simple. They're simple because they're elegant simple. And the thing is, the interesting thing to note is that this site, even if it was not responsive, they could have designed it in a simple way where hierarchies were really evident and where you could see what was most important on the page and you could kind of understand what was going on. They could have done that without doing anything with media queries or fluid grids or anything like that, just through better design. But we weren't forced to at this point, right? What we wanted to do is we wanted to fit as much content above the fold as possible. So we weren't forced into prioritizing. We weren't forced into actually making things elegantly simple. So let me just flip back to the presentation real quick. And if I can get my mouse to cooperate. There it is. Okay, so to get philosophical for just a second, basically the world is made of objects. So I like sushi as an example. Oh, it doesn't look so gross with the green tint. But you can think of you have your grain of rice object and you have your avocado object, and this is kind of wrapped in your seaweed object, which is wrapped in your tuna object, which multiple ones of these bites of sushi create a sushi roll, and multiple sushi rolls create the dinner object, and the 4 dinner objects create the meal object. And the multiple meal objects can create the restaurant object, right? So you have objects inside of objects, objects making up other objects. And you can really kind of continue to break it down or build it up and build it up. Now there's one other thing in the world, without getting religious. What is that one other thing other than objects? Yeah, of course. It's the first time anybody's gotten that. Okay, cool. And yeah, so you eat the sushi, you patron the restaurant, you review the restaurant on Yelp, you talk to your friends. And basically, objects and actions, we can equate those to nouns and verbs. Does this look familiar? Do y'all remember this? So just out of curiosity, so I asked designers, like, did y'all like doing sentence diagramming? And most designers, it's really split. And I thought like most designers would have like really liked it. You're diagramming the sentence. That's so cool. So as developers and programmers, did y'all like this or did you hate it? Never done. Oh, okay. We're quick poll. So who's done sentence diagramming? Who liked sentence diagramming? Okay, about half. All right. No patterns here. All right, so we basically learned in grade school that you put the noun first, and then you have the verb. The noun and the verb is kind of the backbone, and then like you have all these accoutrements on the sentence. You have all these things kind of coming off, which is your adjectives and your adverbs. And the funny thing is that user experience designers, at least, sometimes we start with those adjectives and adverbs. It has to be engaging. It has to be slick. All the things that how it should feel without actually thinking what are the nouns that are playing on our playing field. So kind of even though we learned that you have your noun, you have your verb, we tend to sort of focus on the modifiers. And I think we kind of, as user experience designers, we kind of have this backwards. We think about the modifiers when we're doing our discovery and we're talking to our stakeholders. How do you want this to feel for the users? And then we think about the verbs. We think about what are the action flows. And then maybe we kind of think about how to model the objects, but we don't even really have that as a step in our process. And actually, about 70% of languages, when we talk, we put the nouns first. There are some languages that for talking and writing, the verb comes first, but about 70% of languages. And another kind of fun fact, who here has kids? Kids? I don't have kids. What is your kid's first word other than mama and dada? Ball, right? It wasn't kick, right? My first word was bridge, which could be a verb, but I'm pretty sure we were going over the Jersey Turnpike, so I'm pretty sure that I was using it as a noun. So kids and children, when they're learning to talk, the nouns come first. Definitely, you can have a noun without a verb. It's kind of hard to have a verb without a noun. So web experiences are the same. So here's Amazon. We have the product, and we have the checkout. So information architects actually hate this slide. I've learned recently. But this is definitely an oversimplification that I need to work on a little bit. But if you kind of blur your eyes and look at sort of the history or the evolution of the user experience practice, in the 90s, the majority of what we were doing, at least on the web, was information architecture. Because we were dealing with a lot of static pages. We didn't have CMSs, and so it was our kind of claim to fame, and what we were brought in to do was figure out how to bucket all these static pages and how to put buckets inside of buckets, and our nice thumbprint claim to fame was the navigation at the top. And then in the 2000s, people slowly started to do more stuff on the internet. People are transacting on the internet. It becomes more mainstream to be buying things on the internet. People are making a ton of money on the internet, and they're making money through these transactions. So now it becomes really, really important for when people are going through those transactions, when they're going through a multi-step process, that they understand what they're doing. They don't screw up. So now we have usability testing, we have interaction design, and those things, we're still doing that information architecture for sure, but it's sort of, we're doing interaction design too, and we're building out storyboards, and we're really thinking about what the user does. And my argument is that we still need to do these things. These things are still important, but there's an extra piece. There's this object-oriented piece and thinking about the content objects and how they interact with each other. So this is sort of a new process, or this is kind of what we're kind of doing now. And I'm going to show sort of how I'm suggesting this shift around. So we still need to do that discovery and that research. which kind of goes into this design phase. And of course, this whole thing is iterative, of course. So we go into this design phase, and we kind of go straight into interaction design. So we're doing task flows, and we're doing storyboards. And then we look at the persistent navigation. Sometimes people flip these around, but then we kind of start sketching out, what does the nav look like? We're still really kind of emotionally attached to the navigation. And then we start doing screen sketches. We start doing page design. And page design is a little bit, that doesn't really work anymore. So, and then we go into building and testing and kind of loop back around and do our iterative design. So first, I'm suggesting that we switch these. Persistent navigation, we need to do this last. This is kind of like the last thing we need to worry about. But after we do discovery and research, do this content modeling. And now I'm going to start talking about actually what that means. So why actually do this content modeling before you do these other things? Well, one of the obvious answers is to know your objects, to know your actions. So the more you know about the sushi, the better you could serve the sushi, the better, maybe even better that you could eat your sushi. But to really design the objects to help us be better at actually designing those action flows, especially with user-generated content. So really knowing what is the thing that the user is trying to generate before, and what is the end product? What is the goal that they're trying to create? And then think about the process that they might go through to create that object, to post that campaign, to create that profile. Hierarchy and priority is now a priority. So we need to think about those objects because we need to think about what object is more important than the other object in the context of a given layout, and also what elements within that object are the most important. So when you have an object and it's represented through a module, what pieces of metadata, what pieces of content are the most important for the user? Is it the date? Is it the location? Is it the image? Is it the name? What pieces should be pulled out? One of my favorites, we have hamburgered our nav. So what is the first thing we hide when screen space gets a little tight? We pull that navigation up into that hamburger. And we've found through, at least through my kind of informal research, which was a Facebook poll, 80% of people, when I asked, when you go to a new website, what do you go to first? Do you explore the navigation or do you explore the content on the page? It's a pretty open-ended question. 80% of people said content on the page. One of my favorite quotes was, content first, the navigation is your fire escape. And this was a theme that I kept hearing over and over again. I go to the content on the page, and then if I can't find what I'm looking for, then I go up to the nav. Can't you just see the users being like, oh, God, I gotta go click all these buttons and drill through all these drop downs. Like, as much as UX designers, we get really excited about designing the nav because it's at the top of the page. It's so important. It's got the logo on it. Users really don't want to have to deal with it. They don't want to have to play around with our navigation. They want to click the big shiny objects on the page and get to what they're going for. And then this one, have to be efficient. We all want to be more efficient in what we do. This is not easy work. Has anybody ever been on an easy project? I haven't yet. Still no easy projects. So the more efficient that we can be, the better, right? And I'll give some examples of this. Oh, and then another reason that I should go ahead and say, because of the audience, is another reason we should do this is because this is how it's going to be programmed anyway. So why not? Okay, so here's some examples of what I'm calling unintentional objects. Unintentional, aka inefficient objects. And these are probably a product of, first, not being intentional, not collaborating, and also probably designing at different times. So one thing happening a year later from another thing, but nobody actually kind of thinking about how to sync all these pieces up. So does anybody recognize this site? Can you see? That's Craigslist, yeah. So this is a result listing, basically a listing object. And here it is in a grid view. And here it is in a map view. So you can kind of see some map around here. And in the grid view, we have one layout. And then we get in map view, if you click a little dot, you get this flyout. And you get another box, which is about the same size, all right, as the grid view. But it's not exactly the same. Can anybody see any differences between these? Yeah. 12 days ago versus October 23rd. One has a carousel. Do you think that this was strategic on Craigslist part? Do you think that they had a meeting about this and they're like, oh, when people are in map view, they want to see 12 days ago, but when people are in grid view, they really want to see October 23rd? No, I'm not going to give them that much credit. I don't think that any of these decisions were intentional. And the problem with this is, and maybe you guys can help me answer this, I'm guessing that if the designer says that they want to change that star, there's a little star to favorite it. What if we say we're going to do a redesign and we want it to be a heart now? Probably going to have to change that in 2 places, right? Because these are 2 separate things. So the more that these can be one thing, if you need to make a change, then it can propagate throughout the entire system. So this is not very efficient, first, because you did it twice instead of just taking one design that works and replicating it. Second, it's making updating more difficult. Third, this sucks for the user because in very, very small ways, we're creating cognitive friction. And on the web, that cognitive friction definitely adds up. So even things as simple as where to click to go to the post, view posting versus clicking the title, or things like where the star is, it takes a split second to figure it out, but all these split seconds do add up. And there's definitely, I'm going to show some more gross examples too. So Eventbrite. So this is an Eventbrite module on the home page. This is search results. And this is events that I've been to. So when I'm logged in and I can see all my events. So when I'm on the home page, I can bookmark it. But if I search in my search results, there's no bookmarking. So maybe they just hadn't gotten to that. But if this was one object, then if they updated on the homepage, it should show there, right? Unless there's a very, very good reason not to, right? If you break your rules, there should be a reason. You should be intentional about breaking your rules. You're allowed to break them, but do it consciously. And then here, so now I'm looking at my past events, and for some reason it's not showing location. Maybe they thought that through, maybe there's a reason, but I don't think so. Why? And I'm seeing the date differently. It's in a different format. And my calls to action are, of course I would have different calls to action, but here I could have calls to action like view event or bookmark. And there could just be real estate for calls to action that just switch based on my context. And as a user, I always know that the calls to action are in that place. Google Docs. Oh no. So Google Docs they're all over the place. So do y'all use Google Docs? Yeah. You know how they have there's Drive and then there's Docs and Sheets and Slides. What were they thinking? I have different apps on my phone for these different. Anyway. So very strange. But this right here, this is the grid view in Google Docs. And this is grid view in Google Drive. So to delete a file or to change the name or something here, I click on these little 3 dots. And over there, I have to right click it. So I literally, depending on if I'm in Docs or if I'm in Drive, that same module, it's a different interaction to get to my points. And honestly, who has time for that? I don't have time for that. There's no reason that this should not be the same action. And here, this is basically the list view for Google Docs, and it shows who owns it and when it was last updated, and then also actions at the very bottom, I'm sure, or at the very far end. I'm not sure if you can see that. Here, I'm getting a little bit different formatting for date, so I don't see the year. I don't know why. And then that little line is actually for file size. So I can only see file size in a list view if I'm in Drive, but not if I'm in Docs. So if you make a decision that file size is important, then file size, why would it not be important over here? And then if I'm actually, this is the drop down that I get when I'm searching for to do an attachment, when actually file size might be really, really important there, and they don't show file size. So let's see some good examples. So intentional object design, this is shapeways.com, very, very simple, but homepage grid or kind of a section front, and then search results, it's just smaller, but the exact same, basically the exact same layout, only 4 pieces of metadata, but the same arrangement. And then when you go into your wish list view, the exact same module, but then they just tack on those calls to action. Kickstarter, a little bit more complex example. So here they have different layouts, which is totally fine because if this is responsive, it totally makes sense that maybe here you might have a module with the image and then the kind of the detailed content. And then if it goes maybe into a carousel or another view, that detailed content tucks underneath it. But all the pieces are the same. This layout and this priority, basically the priority hasn't changed, right? Even though the layout changed a little bit. And over here, the search results, the exact same thing. Now, if I log in and I go to the projects that I've backed, I see it in a different view. But this was very intentional. They said, okay, Sophia's doing something different right now. She wants to see what her rewards were. She wants to see how much money she spent on Kickstarter. She wants to have a little checkbox to say that she's got it. So this makes actually a lot of sense that it's more in a table view and the modules are very different. Messages, I don't have messages on the other projects that I haven't backed. So this, during the workshop version, we actually do this as a quick exercise. I'm gonna keep going for time purposes, but on your own, just start looking at this stuff. LinkedIn is a great example of just look at how many different people modules you can see and how much unintentional design you can spot on LinkedIn. There is at least 3 different, based on whether you're looking at a person in a group, you're looking at a person in a search results, or you're looking at people that you're connected to, you message the person in 3 different ways. 3 different ways. So a couple other terms that I'm using. So static page. Page is a single instance, or evergreen. Have y'all heard the term evergreen content? It's kind of a content strategy term. So this is something like the How It Works page, the privacy policy, the About Us, our founders, that kind of thing. The kind of stuff that's more and more getting relegated to the footer because we're finally convincing business owners that people don't give a shit about this stuff. They just want the meat. So a rule of thumb is a static page talks about the purpose of your system. It's not the purpose of your system. It's stuff around it to explain the purpose of the system. Just out of curiosity, is there a term in developer speak for something like this? A page with just one instance, or a thing with just one instance that's never going to get instantiated? Singleton. Okay, cool. Maybe I'll call it Singleton. All right. So an object, a template for content of a certain type. This is basically what you guys are calling a class, right? So this is something like celebrity, event, article. You have multiple instantiations of these things. And a rule of thumb, the objects are the purpose of the system or the classes. When I say object, just in your head, translate to class. They're what the user came for, and they're sometimes what the user came to create. So if it's user-generated, it's a good sign we're looking at an object. So static pages, evergreen, objects, a dead giveaway. And the reason I'm saying things like this is how you recognize an object is because for designers, and what I've noticed through giving this workshop and giving this talk, is it's really a difficult thing for designers to grok and even to start identifying, what is an object? What does it mean to be an object? So one of the hints is that it's time-stamped. If you see a timestamp on it, the About Us page does not have a timestamp. The top navigation does not have a timestamp. It has multiple instances, and it is the purpose. And another difference on what the song that I'm singing and the reality that you're living is I'm really just concerned with the objects that are the business objects. So I say very clearly that the top navigation is not an object. That's a mechanism that we're using, but that's not going to be part of, or the footer, or the dialog box, not objects. So I know that often that in your work those do become objects, but we're really concerned with things like these guys. The business objects, the real world objects. That was a lot of backing up for not much payoff. Okay, moving on. And objects, if it's user generated, definitely if it has a create button, if it has a create new account, create profile, launch campaign, things like that. It's what are those user generated objects? So object instance, what you guys call objects, right? Is the real unique content applied to the object. So that's something like if we're thinking celebrity, it's Justin Bieber, David Duchovny. So we're not quite so concerned with thinking through all of the instances, because if this is something like people.com, thinking through every single celebrity is going to be pretty difficult. And again, this might be interesting to you to know that this is something that I have to kind of reiterate over and over again, that we're not necessarily, we want to use a couple celebrities to sort of stress test our celebrity class / object, but we're not concerned with going through every single one and designing every single one. So we're not concerned so much with all the individual cookies. We want to design the cookie cutters. So to go into a little bit more depth, if your system is is made up of objects, then what are objects made up of? And I've identified 5 main element types. So core content: text, image, video, graphic. Metadata, calls to action, and nested objects. And nested objects is when things get really, really interesting. And I believe that nested objects is kind of ladders up to the term composition. Yeah. And then UI elements. And I make it very clear that UI elements are not part of this thinking at all. UI elements are how you manipulate all that core content and all those pieces of the object. And the funny thing is a lot of entry level or junior designers, this is the thing that they jump into first. They want to think through the UI objects and how the thing slides and moves, and but this is probably one of the last things that I encourage people to concern themselves with is the UI object. So one of the reasons that this is so powerful is that lack of navigation, or that lack of persistent navigation, or hidden persistent navigation. So I'm calling this in-context nav. So objects, this is where those nested objects really come into play, and really strategically figuring out what objects nest inside of other objects, so that when you're on a given screen, you're never at a dead end. You're never just looking at that one object. You're seeing representatives of other types of objects. So as an example, we might have the celebrity object, and the celebrity object might have very little core content. It might have a name, a picture, and a short description or short bio. And then the rest of the object is made up of other objects. It's made up of fan objects and movie objects, for example. And then this is what this really kind of blows people's minds sometimes, this idea of metadata that acts like a nested object. So what I see on sites all the time now, actually, Kickstarter is a good example of something that they don't do correctly, or I guess in my words, don't do correctly. They have an object, a campaign object on their homepage. If you kind of scroll to the bottom of the homepage, you get to projects that my friends have backed. So there, I see kind of a grid of projects that people I'm connected with on Kickstarter, and the projects that they've backed, and I can kind of see that exact same project module. And then underneath, there is a little picture of the person and their name. So it's kind of like it's a nested object, right? It's an object sort of attached to this other object, which is really cool because theoretically it gives me another way to pivot the content, to kind of turn the Rubik's Cube a little bit. So I can click on one of those people and go to their page, and then I can see all the other projects that they've backed, or even other projects that they've looked at or something like that. And it gives me another way to navigate the site. But you can't click on it though on Kickstarter. It's a, I don't know what to call it, dead object or something like that. It's basically a piece of metadata that is not necessarily acting like a nested object. It's not taking me to that person. And it's not that I think this is just maybe a bug or something, but you can get to their profile. It's not that it's like a privacy thing. I can go to like my friends and click on them and see all the things that that Florian has backed or whoever. So this idea of having pieces of metadata that are actually clickable, and I'm sure that you've all been to content sites where you have the author and you can't click on the author, right? And you can't go to see all the other stuff that he's written. Or it tells you the location, but you can't click on that location and sort of pivot on it and see some information about that location or that venue. How do I get directions to this venue? What other shows are playing at this venue? So there's an overlap there. So again, trying to drill in like how to actually recognize these dynamic objects, multiple instances. It's not specific, so watching out for those cookies. You can imagine someone adding or removing one, user generated, and has a timestamp or really any other metadata. So a quick look at the process. So I'm going to actually have a little bit of time. I do want to kind of save room for some discussion because I really want to hear your thoughts on this. This is a interesting group for me to be having this doing this presentation for. But this is the general process that I go through in the workshop. So first identifying the objects, then identifying each element of the object, basically the composition of the object, then prioritizing those objects. So kind of say, all right, you just identified 7 objects. Well, we just had a budget cut. So what happens when you have to kind of simplify your system and sort of MVP your system and then sort of rethinking, like, did that break your system or not? Prioritizing the element composition of each object. So then actually rethinking what elements are the most important to the least important. Determining the manifestation of the objects, which I'm actually going to get to some slides on that in a second, what I mean by the manifestation. Basically, how does it actually come to life? And then actually sketching hierarchy diagrams. So mobile first sketches, I'm calling them hierarchy diagrams, basically because I don't want to kind of get into the idea of it being mobile. It's really just, okay, what are all these pieces in one column? And then prototyping and testing it. So here's the example that we'll do just for the next 10 minutes as I kind of walk through a lightning speed version of the workshop. So we're going to do a social dating app that revolves around bar hopping. So lots of dating apps out there and lots of people bar hopping, and everyone still says, what's the worst way to meet somebody? At a bar. So we're gonna help solve that. So here's our goals. We want to enable meeting someone at a bar thing. We also want to help people explore their neighborhood as well as other neighborhoods in the city. We want to help bars promote events like happy hours and trivia night or live show. And we want to allow sponsorship by liquor companies by offering coupons on drinks. So the first thing that I ask participants to do is to actually just circle the nouns and highlight the main nouns. So you can see someone, okay, so there's going to be people. People are going to be involved in this. There's probably going to be a people object. Bar, okay, this is one of the main goals, so we need a bar object. Neighborhood, and maybe even city. Or we might actually have a conversation around that. So this is where we get into this is more of an art than a science. So do we need neighborhood and city? Maybe it just knows what city you're in. So we have events, but we don't necessarily need to look at happy hour, trivia night, or live show. Those are just examples. Those are cookies, right? It's the event that we really want to focus on. And then the sponsorship by liquor companies probably would have a larger conversation around that on how, do we need a sponsorship object? Do we need just liquor company? And what about drinks? So we sort of define all those objects. Write them on sticky notes, lots of sticky notes. And then we actually go through what are all the elements. So we first start with the core content and the metadata, doing some color coding here. And then actually mapping out the nested objects. So going through and saying, okay, it's bar, we have name, we have distance, maybe rating or score, images, description. And now we want to go through all of our other types of objects and see how they can kind of nest inside. So that if I'm on a bar page, I can get to all of these other types of objects. So, okay, well, neighborhood. All right, so that would be one of those metadata / nested objects. We have people that are in the bar right now, maybe. We have events that are happening at the bar, drink specials, and other bars you might like. And we can continue this exercise. So drinks, okay, well, neighborhood that doesn't really make sense. So we don't need to think, but we should probably spend like 2 seconds thinking that through at least. But no, neighborhood doesn't really make sense. But maybe if this is dark and if we think through like a cookie, so dark and stormy, well, maybe we would see like the bars that have the best dark and stormies. That could be kind of cool. We have people that like this drink or similar drinks. And this is really brainstorming, right? This is not set in stone in like how we would actually design the app. This is thinking through how we might design the app and other ways that we can kind of get this in-context navigation happening. And then calls to action. And the cool thing about just sticking on some calls to action is this kind of audits your system on how many task flows you're eventually going to have to design. So getting directions, writing a review. Are we going to have reviews? Does review need to be an object? Do we need to add that? Do we need to favorite that? Favoriting drinks. And so one of the things that I like to highlight after the participants have kind of gone through this exercise is so for this example, we have people on each one of these. Okay, so bar, we have people in the bar. Drink, we have people that like the drink. Person, we have their friends. Neighborhood, we have people that are affiliated with that neighborhood. And then we have event, we have people going to that event. Now, if we're going to be super simple about this and keep this as a very kind of elegant, easy to design and develop system, that people object should look exactly the same. So if we've determined that for this dating app, we want picture, age, and gender as the most important things, we should have picture, age, and gender on each one. And we shouldn't have one where like, oh, let's change it around and have like the name on there or something like that. We should reuse that object. So let's talk about this page. So this is kind of getting into some more advanced things when we're thinking through all the different elements of an object. So one thing, and this is kind of a little bit of my personal brainstorming on if I did like the advanced object-oriented UX workshop and kind of taking it a step further, of going back through this and thinking through at the element level, even permissions. So is this something that an admin sees or you can only see when you're logged in? So you can start capturing those kind of business rules through this methodology. Even like the variables, so kind of the requirements around the different types of core content and metadata. Smart defaults, the calls to action. So this one's super interesting, especially from a design perspective. Actually use that to pivot into your user types and your personas. Like who is doing this action? And then also looking for inheritance. So this is something that I'm leveraging. When you start seeing this happens in the workshop a lot, when we use some of the other examples that we use, we have articles showing up or recipes. I do a kind of a cooking site too example. And often there'll be 2 to 3 objects that are very, very similar, that have like 80% in common. And a question that I get is, well, should this be 1 or should this be 2? And we can get into things to even increase your efficiency more is having something like, for the people.com example, maybe we have author, we have user, and we have celebrity, and they have a lot of the same elements. Well, maybe they can ladder up to some sort of person super object, and you can get inheritance working for you. So then we actually go through and prioritize the objects. So this is when we say, all right, let's say you only have 3 objects. All right, take out some objects, because basically I actually use this process to estimate. As a consultant, I spend like 4 hours or something doing a quick and dirty version of this to say, ooh, this system that I'm working with probably is going to have like 7 or 8 objects. Like you can kind of gauge complexity based on the number of objects. So here we're saying, all right, we just had a budget cut, so we got to simplify the system. Let's cut out an object and make sure that when we cut out that object, we're not creating any dead ends. We don't have, like, if I cut out drink, maybe I have a ingredient object, like rum or something like that. And the rum object is really, all it is just drinks. And then that rum object now becomes kind of obsolete. So then we take that one out, and then we actually prioritize the elements. So shifting these things around to say, this is more important than that, and literally creating a forced ranking of all the elements. And so the fun part about this is now that you've done all this work, when you start sketching, you pretty much know exactly what to sketch. You know what's at the top of the page, or, and even sometimes priority doesn't necessarily align completely to top of the page and bottom of the page. I know that. But you have a sense of the priority, and you know what things need to be on there. And other things might come up, of course. You might say, oh, we totally forgot something, and that's okay. But you have an outline before you actually start writing the book. So objects manifested, I found 3 main ways that objects manifest. You have modules, which are your little representatives that kind of go all around the site. You have your detail page, which is everything about it, all the metadata, all the content. The module goes to the detail page. And then you have a list page. And the list is something, if this is product, right? I have my little product module. I have my full detail page. And then my list page is my catalog. It's the list of all the modules. Now, of course, we have things like home pages, right? What is a home page, or like a section front? And this is another funny thing, because a lot of times it's the first thing we start sketching. We start sketching the home page. And that's the last thing we should be sketching. We need to come up with this system. And then we can say, all right, now let's do the fun thing and sketch out the home page and pull like these important modules and create a carousel at the top and crap like that. So some examples. So Amazon, module, detail page, list. Product, detail, catalog. And then Kickstarter, we have the module, the detail page, the whole thing, and the list page. This is kind of a list page filtered by games. So what we do is we actually go through all of our all of our objects, and we think through, okay, is it gonna have, like, I've yet to meet an object that does not have a module, but there are some objects that do not have detail pages and do not have list pages. So something like comment or review. Often a comment and a review will only have a module. Everything fits in the module. You don't click through the comment to see a detail view. Or maybe some of them you do. That's a design decision. So for something like bar, we're going to say, okay, there's a module, there's a detail, and there's a list. For person, module, and detail. But you know what? To see a list of all people like that are active in this app, like that doesn't make sense. So I'm going to say, no, I don't think that there's a list. But I might play around with it. I might sketch it and say, okay, maybe. And then neighborhood, there's going to be a module, there's going to be a detail. Is there going to be a list of all neighborhoods? Maybe I'll play around with it, not sure. So then we actually sketch these hierarchy diagrams, we have fun sketch templates, and that's it. That's basically the process that we go through. And yeah, so thank you. Bye.